My name is Tim Soerens. Thanks for saying yes to my pitch. That was fantastic. I didn't get to finish it because of the cowbell. What I was going to say is that, has anybody ever heard that before? It's one of my favorite kind of quotes or ideas. I'll say it again. That evangelicals once posed, how do things change? Is it evolution? Do things just get better on their own and you need to be patient? Or is it more like revolution? Like you got to take up arms and make it happen and all that. And yeah, he said, neither. Things change when you tell an alternative story. Which I think could frame a good chunk of our conversation today. And so within that idea, I want us to talk quite a bit about the power of neighborhoods and really like digging into this idea that the neighborhood is the unit of change, which I think is kind of the understory that I think we're invited into. I'll explain more what I mean by that. But before we dig in, I wonder if we'll just go really quickly, because I'm gonna talk for about, actually, I Googled this. Actually, I used ChatGPT on the way in. Guess, anybody have any guess as to how long, this is what I put in. How long is the average adult attention span listening to one person in the year 2025? Any guesses? 8 minutes? It's a little more than that, actually. 15? It is 10 seconds? Jeez, that is dystopic. We've already lost. It is, according to this one, like, I think ChatGPT got it from the website, it is 19 minutes and 17 seconds, which I think that was pretty accurate. So I'm not going to talk for more than 19 minutes and 17 seconds, if I can at all help it. What we're going to do is I'm going to do some kind of framing conversations here, and then we're going to get into smallish groups, 3-4 people to have a bit of a conversation, and then we'll all come back together about 1:45 the hour, and I promise we'll be done right at noon, because we don't want to miss lunch. Okay. We don't want to miss lunch. If there's one thing I don't want to do, it's to keep you from food. Okay. Okay. So here is where I think I want to begin. You're fine. Here's kind of a really simple framing scripture, and this is a text that I think many of you have probably heard before. We could talk about it all day long, but I just want to set it as kind of like a framing conversation. Probably many of you have heard it before. It comes from Mark 9, I believe. It's that time when Jesus was asked that big question of like, okay, you're this hot rabbi, and you're getting a lot of attention, but you tell me this, kind of riddle me this. What's the most important commandment there is? And what some of you know, what does he say?
Love God and love your neighbor as yourself.
Right. And right before that, he says this, "Hear, O Israel," because that was his primary audience, "the Lord your God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And then you should love your neighbor as yourself." Yeah, and all the prophets are built on this. And what I want to begin with, we're going to get to the whole neighborhood part in a second, but I think it's important just to remember, for some of us, this might be the most obvious thing in the world. And for some of us, this might be like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I've thought about it this way. But part of why Jesus and all of the rabbis before him were very clued in and talking about this idea that the Lord your God is one, not 2 or 3 or 3 million, is that as God was talking about something we've been talking about all morning, peace, shalom, which is the Jewish word for peace, which actually in some ways is a bigger, fuller understanding of the word peace. If the Lord your God is one, that means that God cares about everything. Not just about spirituality, not just about emotions, not just about the body. God cares and longs to see shalom with everything. And that's because God is one. There's one mission, and it is the renewal and reconciliation of everything. This is what Jesus was all about. Which means that, and maybe, again, this might be like, well, of course this is true. But I feel like for lots of reasons, not least a philosophic tradition that was led by the Greeks that kind of split things between the good and the bad, or like the spiritual part and the body. Have y'all ever heard of this? Dualism, as though it's like one thing is good and it tended to be like pointed at the head, and then everything else is bad, and you got to figure out how to get the good and avoid the bad. But that actually is like completely nonsensical to the Jewish understanding of the world, which of course is who Jesus is. And what we're called into is the renewal of everything, every square inch, every square mile, every molecule. And so that means that there's nothing that we can ever lay our eyes on. People, streets, blocks, even invisible things like systems and power that God doesn't care about. And if God is renewing and restoring everything, then that becomes our mission, to join in what God's doing and renewing and restoring everything. But there's a bit of a problem here, and this is where we go to the neighbor and neighborhood part. We are limited creatures, at least I am. Like when I put my hand in the air, it doesn't hit the ceiling. It stops. We have bodies. We are creatures. We're not the creator, which means that if we are tasked with joining in God's holistic, big dream of renewing and restoring everything, that a big part of what we need to discern with our lives, with our communal lives, is where we're going to join that work. Because we can't be everywhere and do everything for everything. And actually, while that might sound like a kind of a bummer, it's a gift. Yeah, it's not a bad movie. It's actually a gift that we get to discern. These are our own stories, where we're going to be most active, where we're going to focus our attention, and where we're not. Or where we're going to primarily focus our attention, and where we're going to trust that other people and other things are going to take up the slack. That doesn't mean that we're bad people or bad Christians by having some focus. So now we're going to come back to that second part of the story, and I would propose this. Lots of books have been written about this, and I can share some of these after if you're interested in it. But this goes back to, this is why I love the Ivan Illich thing, because I think, and maybe I'm off on this, but I think that we're living in a moment where there are two dominant imaginations for how things change. You could even say how progress happens, how justice happens, how transformation happens. And we're feeling the effects, I would argue, within our profoundly fractured and polarized country, at least here in the US, although I think there's elements of it all over the world. Here is one, I would say, way that we imagine, and you can see this like people talk about this all the time, whole institutions, I would argue, have bet on this idea, and neither of these are obviously bad. But theory of change number one, how do people change? Individual hearts and minds. If you want to create a world of change, the way that you create that change is you individually go from person to person and seek to change their heart, their mind, their habits. The individual is the most important thing that you can possibly begin to change. And if you can change one person, you can maybe change another, and on and on. And I'm not arguing that that's not true. You can imagine, like, which political party most believes this? You focus on the individual. Any guesses? This is not going to be a partisan thing, by the way, trust me. The Republican, right? And for good reasons, right? This has to do about agency. This has to do about responsibility. This has to do about, like, personal ethics. This has to do with, like, get after it, right? And for good reasons. Now, you can see where I'm going with this, probably. So, individual. Now, there is another, and I would say probably equally valid perspective of how things change. And that has to do with this. Listen, we're all relational. We have to live together. We're interdependent. And you know what happens when you're interdependent? You create systems. And when you create systems, you got to be really careful about how those systems end up, whether intentionally or unintentionally, doing real harm to people. We just heard the story from the state senator who said that, I mean, this is good news and bad news, that her kid doesn't have asthma anymore because that kid moved to the north side. Yeah. The kid on the south side had asthma. And that same kid, staying on the south side with environmental pollutants, probably would have a 10-year less life expectancy. That's egregious. It's horrible. We all agree with that. How do you create change? You have to change the system. The system, the structure, is the most powerful lever of change. And if you want to create change, you got to go change the system. If you don't change the system, it doesn't matter what's going to happen to the individual. Now, you can see where I'm going with this. There is an alternative story, friends, for how we can begin to pursue change. And I would argue it is a really, really powerful invitation to the local church, the truly local church. And that is to wrestle through how we might begin to see the neighborhood and this is the title of this little conversation, as the unit of change. Right here. Now, here's why I'm so bullish on neighborhoods, or here's the kind of the word that I actually love, arguably maybe even more, but it doesn't really translate to everybody. Neighborhood's a little bit better for that. And even the word neighborhood, we can talk about how you define that. But arguably, neighborhoods are not just individuals, nor are they just systems, but they include both at an everyday way where we can begin to feel the effects of our individual and collective actions. Neighborhoods are made up of all kinds of beautiful individuals with their own very individual stories, and every single individual, of course, is beloved of God and should be of us, and that gives us you could say, an ethic or a mandate to love everyone. And at the part of why a neighborhood, maybe not just a block or a street, but an actual neighborhood, which is usually a geographic area that's large enough to live quite a bit of your life. So this is pure, I would define, this is why I like the word parish, it's a little more elastic. The word parish, I wrote a book called The New Parish, and we try and argue that the parish is a geographic area that's large enough to live a lot of your life. Theoretically, you could live, work, and play all in it. And it's small enough to be known as a character in the story of that place. So like the great city of Chicago, which we all love, too big to really be known unless you're really famous, which is not going to, de facto happen for most of us and create several other problems. Whereas a neighborhood, if you show up to your neighborhood association, if you show up as a concerned teacher, if you show up and have a soup night in your home, if you are present, you can be known. Not by everybody probably, but you can become a character who's known in that place. And if you try and be a part of God's shalom in that place, especially with some others, you can try things, and as you try things, you will then get to see in real time and over time what happens. Sometimes you'll have good intentions, you'll do something, and actually it goes embarrassingly horrible. You think, I'm never going to do that again, and you change. Sometimes it's incredible, and you might want to invite other people into it. Neighborhoods have individuals, they also have systems. Now, here's the last thing, then we're going to, what was that?
It's revolutionary.
I think so, but it's also just like right beneath our feet. It's just right there. If the church is the hope of the world, which I believe that it is because of what God's mission is and what God is doing, I would like to offer to us together that imagination requires all the more that we see the neighborhoods and our common life in neighborhoods as the unit of change. Because, and this is maybe a whole different conversation, it's a whole different talk, but I would argue that, I believe the church is the hope of the world. I do not believe, and maybe this is controversial, I don't believe that the church service is the hope of the world, necessarily. Our buildings are not actually the hope of the world. Even our multi-billion-dollar pension funds, they are not the hope of the world. The church, people, our relationships together, as we pursue God's shalom in our everyday life, that actually, I would argue, is the hope of the world. If that is our mission, then we have to have the neighborhood and its holistic flourishing as how we measure change. That's what we're aiming for. That's what we're driving for. That includes economic realities. It includes environmental realities. It includes civic realities. I would argue more than political. Civic. It includes teachers and kids, victims and victimizers. It's everybody. That's what we're pursuing, is a holistic renewal from neighborhood to neighborhood, which I would argue requires a holistic, grounded, everyday church. Now, last thing, and we'll get into triads here. Why I bring that up is, without ever meaning to, a lot of us, most of us are from congregations, which is amazing, and presumably we're all Christians. In the last, especially 50, 60 years, there's been this story, which is somewhat unfortunate, I would argue, that church growth, or like who attends a given service or liturgy on a given Sunday, that's how you tell whether or not we're being successful. And there's some good reasons for that, but that is not the big game. Our church services and programs, that's kind of like, compare that to like the huddle in a football game. The huddle is important. It is not the game. It's not the game. So why would you say, oh my gosh, we had an incredible huddle, and then didn't even call a play? In fact, you're maybe not even playing the game. Or worse, you think you're playing the game, but it's an entirely different sport altogether. The game that we are called into by our Lord Jesus Christ is to join the Holy Spirit at work, present, now, in this second and for all time, into God's dream of shalom. That's the game that we're called into playing. And there are hundreds, maybe thousands of reasons for why we get distracted and divided as to the reality of that game. But we shouldn't, because, why? The Lord your God is one mission. But because we're limited and that's a good thing, we have to discern where do we best participate in that in the most holistic and this is a whole other talk, networked way, which is one of the reasons why I'm so grateful to be here and so grateful for Together Chicago. Because what we have to figure out in being the church is both how do we do this at the neighborhood level, and then how do we learn to do this across the city, alas, even around Chicagoland and beyond. Okay, Charlie, go ahead. No, we're good. I think I'm actually past my 19 minutes and 17 seconds. Yeah, thanks, bro. I appreciate it.
This is a burning question for me.
Okay.
Because I'm not from a congregation.
Yeah.
I was from a congregation.
Yeah.
I used to be part of the South Street Church. I actually was a commercial banker and got the financing done for this building.
Oh, thank you. Amazing.
It was a really tough deal, and I was a young banker, and somehow. But like, I just know of people who in this like room even who have been extremely influential in the neighborhood who aren't from a church, and I still have a strong faith, but some of the language that you're using maybe feels like exclusive to a lot of people who are doing really good work who don't consider themselves Christians, but they feel like God's calling or some calling of goodness into them that that maybe if we use that language too much, like it's not going to include, because if the neighborhood is the unit for change, then it can't be like, you got to try to come, I got to get you to come to my church, and I've got to get them early so they can come to my church. Like, that doesn't feel as life-giving to me as, like, what does that everybody need to be in that state of shalom, which may or may not be anyone's particular church. So I'm just throwing that out there as something that, like, I feel very, like that I was thinking about the whole time we had this presentation.
Yeah. Charlie, try one more time with me. What do you feel like? I think is really important. Let's try and figure like what do you feel like is the kind of like question or the like.
Well, what I'm wondering is if we can create this story of like the alternative, the shalom, without like in a language that's inclusive to all people.
Oh, I got you.
Maybe like that's the question, is like,
yes.
So where we don't feel, or people don't feel like they don't have a place in the work unless they
yes.
believe. And I mean, I'm all for faith, and
totally.
I think I still have it, but I mean, honestly, I'm struggling with that because I feel very called to my neighborhood.
Yes.
And it doesn't feel like it fits with church anymore. And maybe the language of church doesn't feel like as like huddly to me. Like
Yes.
like I don't go to church and feel like I can go and do my work better because so like that hasn't really inspired me
Yes.
as much as other things. So
Let me see if I'm tracking. Okay, I think I am. I'm so glad you brought this up because what I'm not trying to say is, from kind of a top-down perspective, in all of our neighborhoods, we need to like visibly, forcibly dunk everyone baptismally and say you're part of the church. No. What I'm saying is the role of the church is to be pursuing the shalom of God at the neighborhood level. Shalom is for everybody, regardless of faith, no faith, religious tradition, no, like that's for human beings and beyond. I would argue. Everything. So the vision is the shalom of everything. The church, I would argue, has a very unique mission and mandate to pursue that in ways that other associations, even other perhaps faith traditions, don't have in quite the same way. But no, this is part of why it matters so much, because the Lord your God is one, which means not everyone's going to be a part of the church, but everyone matters.
and everyone's part of the neighborhood.
And everyone's part of the neighborhood, which is one of the few diverse and fully inclusive platforms to be engaging literally everything in a differentiated way.
The church is a servant to that mission.
Yes.
And for so long, the church has not been postured as a servant.
No. I forget who said this, but I think this is a powerful quote too. It came out of some Brit in like the 19th century, that the church is the only organization that exists for the benefit of its non-members. Think about that. There is nothing else I know of. Every association creates a common story and framework and values, and then they seek to protect that as an association. Like a religious association. There's nothing wrong with this, by the way, I don't think. The church exists for the benefit, not for ourselves. We don't get together to like figure out how we can like protect our own interests. Yeah, no, that's opposite of what our call is. We exist for the benefit of others, especially our enemies. I mean, this is really, there's a lot of good reasons not to be a Christian, and that's one of them. Like that's actually what we're trying to do, is come together to love everyone, including our enemies. You know the other line from Jesus where he's like, you think you're so special because you love people just like you? No, sorry. You don't get a star for that. I'm talking about stars when you embrace and love and have actually affection for the people that you dislike and actually disgust you the most. That's what I'm talking about. That's our mission. Now, that doesn't fully reflect our lived experience of what it means to be the church, which is why we create rooms like this. We're trying to figure it out. But it is important. Okay.
I wanted you to define church.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is my definition, okay? I do think about this a lot. I would... here's what I've been thinking about recently. You all feel free to push back on this if you'd like. I think most of us can agree that the church itself, like it's kind of silly. I've trained my kids not to like point at like church buildings and say that's the church. It's like a church building, and you have to add the second word, or it literally doesn't even make sense.
I guess the biblical.
So I would argue the church is people, but here's what I've been thinking about lately. The church actually, none of us, unless, and I would argue this would be hard for you to get away with, like at least biblically. An individual person can't be the church on their own, correct? Right?
Correct.
Would we pretty much agree with this?
The word literally means assembly.
Exactly. So I would argue that the church actually, most fundamentally, is the relationships that we hold together, and I would push it further, at least in desire, within a particular place that's pursuing the mission of God. That's how I would define it. So here we are in, what neighborhood are we in right now? Old Town, probably? Near North. Think about this. I'm not against liturgies and congregations and important buildings like this. Thank you very much for financing it. But like in near North, there's what, 50, 60,000 people probably that live here? More? Maybe more. It's super dense, right? Let's just say 50,000 is kind of easy number. And let's say we could take our time with this if we wanted to do longer, but let's say that 5,000 people here near North would raise their hands if you said, keep your hand up in the air if A, you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, a Christian, and you care about the holistic flourishing of this neighborhood. You live here, you're a Christian, you care about this place. Don't you think there's probably 5,000 people in near North that would keep their hands raised? Would we guess? I think it might be more, actually. What is that? That's 10%. It might be 20, 30, 35%. And yet, where is that church on a Tuesday morning? What are our relationships? How do we know each other? We don't. Which I would argue is a grand task for us. Because we think that the primary identity for what it means to be the church is to go to church. Even though that doesn't make any sense, because it's something that we are in a relational way, not something that we go to or even consume. The language doesn't even make sense. That's like saying, I'm going to the basketball team. No. You can go to the game, or you can be on the team. You don't go to the game. Does this make sense? And so,
I guess I asked that because of the young lady. She said she don't belong to a church, but she has faith, and her faith is just can be equal to people that's in the church, or even greater.
Right. Well, and I know of people who don't have that kind of faith,
Yeah.
but are doing this work
and love this neighborhood a lot.
and are acting out of a space of love.
Yes.
And are doing amazing things and leading amazing
Yes.
efforts in this exact neighborhood.
Yes.
And working alongside people who are in the church.
Exactly.
I just want to make sure we're including them because
100%.
because some of those people who you say would they raise their hand, they're not going to say I'm a follower of Jesus and I'm doing they're creating, but they're going to say I'm creating shalom.
Yes.
And I'm willing to work alongside the followers of Jesus and also the followers of any other faith.
Yes.
The followers of just a sense of I believe in loving people and that's what I'm here for, but I don't have a cerebral understanding of a doctrine or creed.
Yes.
But I believe that somehow I'm here to love people.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that those people are included.
Of course.
More in the definition, because.
Well, I would say in the definition of the neighbor.
Who are doing maybe it's not. Maybe it's blasphemous to say they're part of the church, but they're in some ways I feel
But they probably wouldn't even self-identify as part of the church.
Right.
But they definitely are part of the neighborhood. And
right.
I think
they're part of this effort that's bringing shalom.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
And I guess my sense is that if I wouldn't define part of my effort of shalom toward getting those people to sign up for church. You know what I mean? I want them to just keep doing what they're doing and be loved and included in the work without trying to get them to go to church.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. I would say the distinction between the church and others who are seeking that same mission of wholeness, unity, love, connected, our mutual flourishing is the church feels this sense of this is what God has called me to do. I am designated a servant to this. Well, whereas someone else would maybe self-designate that to themselves, I feel like I want to pursue this. This is something I love, I'm passionate about. So they're collaborators, but the church is in a position where they actually feel God has set me apart and given me this mandate. This isn't something that I recreationally do. Oh, this is a passion project. No, I have been set apart for this. And even if I don't like it, you know what I'm saying? Even if I don't want to, it ain't even my jizz, God has called me to do this. This isn't a negotiation. If Jesus is Lord, then I should be seeking the flourishing of the world that is His. This is His. He cares about this world. He cares about this community. He cares about these people.
So what would Jesus do? He will love everybody in the neighborhood, everybody, and what he's trying to bring out, and what we're here for is to learn how to do that, to get some tools so we can go back to our neighborhoods and include everybody in love.
That's right.
So
That's right, Barbara.
I think about, like, for instance, like police officer. For instance. A police officer should be seeking the shalom in the community, in a specific way, specifically through justice, and protecting and all these other things that we know police officers for. That's not to say they're the only people who do that. If I'm hearing a sound in my neighbor's house, and I poke my head out the window, like, what's going on? And they're in need. That's not to say, I'm not a police officer, so, it's not my business. Like, just because someone has a designation, a calling to serve in a particular way, that doesn't mean we're all exempt from seeking the protection of each other in their specific examples. So,
and I guess maybe I'm not even looking for an answer here as much as just
You're
raising it
thinking
as a
through it.
question and thinking about it out loud. Just knowing that there are a lot of people, maybe even in this room, who like feel this like calling to seek shalom in their neighborhoods and don't maybe identify with the language of the church or. But
Oh,
then,
yeah.
you know,
Of course.
So
For all kinds of good reasons. It's a different conversation, but I actually think those of us who still consider ourselves either Christians or want to be the church in the neighborhood are interdependent on those people. In fact, we literally need them entirely. That doesn't mean they are part. Like, it's also weird to be like, no, you're part of the church. Like, that's weird too, right?
they might not even want to be. part of
Right.
it.
That's just that's kind of yucky. But yeah, it's a good conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any answers. It's just maybe I'm still sorting through it myself. So thank you all for listening.
No, of course.
Okay.
Of course. Okay, so here, let's do a choose your own adventure. Adventure number 1. We get into groups of 3, and you get to meet some new people, and you get to talk a little bit about what you love about your neighborhood right now and how you see God at work. Adventure number 2, because we have about 10 minutes left, yes, exactly, is we just keep having kind of a broader conversation. Show of hands for adventure number 1, smaller groups. Number 2, smaller, okay, bigger, okay, I'm glad I asked. Okay, so maybe here's like a framing conversation. Then just everybody just like we've been doing. Like, let's just like see what we can create. The reason for me anyway, and I should tell you, the Parish Collective, which is the organization that I work with, our mission is to connect people to be the church in the neighborhood. And all those words matter to us. People, be is very different than go. And that doesn't mean going, there's anything wrong with going. In fact, going I think is really, really important. Just, it's a different game than being.
Be the place.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we're trying to figure out is how to create environments of new relationships and connections, not unlike what's happening here, where more and more and more people at the neighborhood level have an imagination and even like an identity of wrestling with what does it mean for us to be the church in this place, which is like who else is pursuing shalom, and it actually isn't just doing works of like mission and justice, and it's also, here's another reason not to become a Christian, is we are tasked with becoming like Jesus in ways that only we can be, which means we don't just do things, we're also seeking to be literally holy. We're seeking to be like far more whole. Our mandate is to forgive people 70 times 7. That's hard. Like, we don't just,
unreasonable.
It's hard. Like, we're seeking to not just crank and make stuff happen. We're at the same time always asking of ourselves, how do I need to be formed to becoming a more, fruits of the Spirit, loving, giving, more patient, generous person, even as we pursue this mission? You see how that's like level 2, right? And then there's a third level, which is, how do we do this? It's not just a bunch of individual super people who are doing great stuff. We're called to figure out spaces of belonging, relationship, which could have multiple levels of responsibility. But I would argue when you put a common sense of mission and a common sense of formation and relationship together within a place, well, those are kind of the elements of what it means to be the church, I would propose. And
you're constantly out of your comfort zone in that scenario you just painted. Like, it's easy for me
hard
to gravitate to people who think like me, who move like me, who act like me.
of course,
Yeah, that's easy.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, what's up, bro?
Mhm.
But when they have a different cultural dynamic, but we in the same neighborhood, you know, maybe nuances in the values and stuff like that, but we in the same neighborhood, and I'm having to love you.
yes,
You know what I'm saying? I'm having to pursue your flourishing, but to do it requires me to get very uncomfortable.
yes,
You know, that is something that most people aren't willing to do. You know,
Or know how to.
Or we don't know
know
how.
where to begin. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, like, to have a mission to pursue that, you know, actively, and to embrace that, I think is a lot of the reasons why we see, you know, people are like pursuing answers that seem easier. Individual, you know what I'm saying? Just fix your own life.
yeah, Martel.
Get straight, or like it's just the system. We
Totally.
just pass this legislation, you know what I'm saying? And, you know, get them some more money over here, and yeah, we done.
Yep.
It's like, no, you're called into a relationship with people
Yes.
and to connect with people who don't even think like you. who don't
Yes.
act like you.
There's another, I didn't write it down, but there's another kind of like very dominant imagination or theory of change, which I think is very popular right now. And for some good reasons, I suppose, but that is essentially if you want to create change, I would say this is a minority opinion. Thinking of the neighborhood as unit of change, this is not super duper popular in like general culture. What is pretty popular in the last like 20 years or so, which again is not bad, but I think can't get us to where we need to go, is if you want to create change, you drill down on the issue that you care about the most. Homelessness, addiction, housing, environment, foster care, human trafficking, endless, right? And these are really, really important, and we really need expertise in them. So I'm not saying we don't. Creative financing, impact investing, et cetera, et cetera. And then we drill deep, deep, deep into that issue, but we are rarely seeing the effects between these multiple issues in our everyday life, which creates a real problem, actually. Because if you really care about an issue, usually to have to get it funded, and usually what that happens, you're going to the same foundations, you're going to the same government entities, and what do you do then? Instead of collaborating for how we, exactly. So if the neighborhood is a unit of change, then we have a defined place where we're saying we are working hard, slowly or quickly, over time, for the holistic flourishing. So do we care about economic justice here? Well, of course we do. Do we care about housing? Of course we do. Do we care about our kids in this neighborhood, every single one of them? Of course we do. Do we care about emotional health? Well, yes, of course we do. Do we care about physical health? Of course we do. There's nothing we don't care about, but we care about it the most here, because here is where we can actually see the effects of our actions and be a character in the story of this place. And we can't do that across the entire city. And we certainly can't do that across the whole state or the country. And what can easily happen is we get professionalized experts with very good intentions who then use really sharp elbows against each other to try and get their thing accomplished, unfortunately at the expense of the other.
You've been very provocative right now.
See whether they're recording this, huh? I might get in trouble. Yeah.
So if we're trying to think of like a way to do neighborhood together or to create that, like tell a story that, like I'm trying to get to what is that imagination that is better? Like what are the characteristics of it? What does it look like? How do we know if we're getting closer to it? That's sort of what I think would help inspire me to keep going.
Yeah.
And I think some of what you're saying is really good, and it's helping me. I feel like sort of these notions of power, because I do think there's also a theory that maybe we've seen in the political world is where you just get as much power as you can and you ram it down people's throats.
100%.
You know, and so that's like a theory of change that maybe
Yes.
some people ascribe to. And,
yes.
You know, it's like, and I know sometimes like that theory is so powerful and maybe is such a like strong human temptation that even if you're trying to do this, like there's always like going to be a wrestling with that upper part of it. And how do I like find the space in my spirit and soul to stay grounded in that place, calling me to shalom without like getting sucked into this other way of doing.
100%. Two quick thoughts on this that are fun trails for later. One, some of you saw that little bit, and I should be the official blurb for the Inhabit conference that our organization is putting on at Lawndale. Jonathan Brooks is our board chair, a very, very dear friend of mine. His definition of Christian mission is learning to love your neighborhood. That's it. And everyone in it, and being connected. Love is the mission. Carl Jung said, and this is mine, to me this is like, this is our moment right now. Maybe it has been for a long time. It probably has. Feels very acute right now, though. That in the absence of love, power fills the vacuum.
Yes.
That's what we're experiencing right now. In the absence of love, power fills the vacuum. And we'll fight to hold on to it.
I'm sorry, I just have to. It's only true if you believe that power is filling the vacuum because you perhaps haven't been able to witness the love.
Of course.
Okay, I'm just going to say that because I work in this neighborhood and that story could be a story that someone would espouse, but it's only because you're not close enough to the love to feel it and witness.
Which is what the quote is. That's what the quote is. In the absence of love. If you don't have love, power will seek to fill that vacuum. If it's there, the need for power and the need for, because we're being recorded, I will not talk about politics for sure. But like you can imagine, in this country and many others, politicians who are very thirsty for power, who clearly have never been loved well. Clearly.
Because the pursuit of power is reflective of self-preservation. I'm going to preserve, you know what I'm saying, my comforts, my standards, my well-being over and against y'all because y'all a threat.
Yeah.
In the space that you're loved, like
you don't need it.
Because you know you're going to be cared for.
That's right. That's right. God created us as bonding mammals. We need human connection and safety and love as much as we need air, like clean air and water and food and shelter. We need it. And when we don't get it, we biologically will react. Biologically.
What about this is real simple. Somebody on the street, you rather give them some money as opposed to sit and talk with them for a while. We'd rather do that, than to spend that time to come out of our comfort zone. I mean, it's nothing wrong with giving the money, but the better part would be to spend some time with that person, to let them know that, Jesus loves them and that you care about them. But we are giving them money and
That's right.
keep on walking.
That's right.
Connection is more important sometimes than like the practical need of money, because they need more than money. They need to be connected to community again.
Right.
They've been disenfranchised.
They need everything that we need. Well, hold on. I promised I wouldn't keep you between you and food. It's noon, and I do have a very quick PSA, and that is these kinds of conversations is what we both celebrate and talk about at the Inhabit Conference, and I've got some flyers if you want to come. And if you can't afford it, please email me, tim@parishcollective.org, and I can get you a discount or a scholarship. And then I have 2 books. That's all I had in my house. But I did write 2 books, one with some friends, one on my own, that flesh out some of these ideas. And they're $15 or 2 for $20.
So is that the alternative story? I'm just like, the storytelling part is what? I came here to find out the alternative.
The alternative story,
The
alternative story is to live into a vision of seeing the neighborhood as a unit of change. And
What was the definition about love? Because I just want to write that one down. The part.
in the absence of love, power fills the vacuum.
But there was another one before that.
Jonathan Brooks, Christian mission. I'm butchering this a little bit, but my version is Christian mission is learning to love your neighborhood. That's what it is. And that's in a networked sense, I think.
And I mean, maybe if you wanted to make it more inclusive, you could say the human mission is to love one another. I'm just saying for the people who don't prescribe.
Absolutely.
And learning how to be a neighbor, you know?
Yeah.
Think, I'm saying if you don't live in your community where your church is at, how are you a neighbor in your own community?
Yeah.
The same way if you're a good neighbor,
Yeah.
you don't keep to yourself. You want to do that in your church community.
That's right.
Okay, do that.
That's right. All right, y'all.
And we have another training next month, just to remind you all.
Yes.
First weekend of April.
Yeah. Martin.
This whole time I was thinking about one.
Yes.
It's like
Big time.
It embodies
That's right.
the whole point. Like it's like this big old meta narrative, and then he's like, "But I'm gonna come in the neighborhood."
God, flesh and blood moved into the neighborhood is what's in the message. It's beautiful. So y'all, we'll bounce. My email, if y'all want to keep talking, is tim@parishcollective.org.
Is that written down over there?
No. But you know what? I'll write on the board. That's a very good idea. It's like a wall behind you. Is org. Okay. Good. Love it, Martel. And that's the same as the website too, parishcollective.org. You'll see a little bit more what we're about. We're always trying to figure new stuff out. We're a scrappy, small nonprofit, but
What's the mission of that nonprofit?
to connect people to be the church in the neighborhood.
So you do like that word parish?
I love the word parish. Yeah, I feel like I think it's a gem that needs to be brought back, because this is a whole other conversation, but neighborhoods and neighborhood definitions, of course, like in this city and a lot of others, can be easily disputed, boundaries, et cetera, whereas parish, at least for those of us that consider ourselves Christians or want to be the church, we just kind of own that. Except in New Orleans, it's more complicated. But
The connotation of the parish does imply some level of commitment and responsibility to it.
yes,
Just traditionally speaking, which like I went to a church, they switched their community groups to parish groups
Yeah.
for that very reason.
Yep.
Because I'm moving neighborhoods. I'm here.
Yeah.
I live here, but that don't necessarily mean I'm committed to
that's right.
space. And I think there used to be a time neighborhood meant that, but I think the more globalization is taking place and technology and all those other different factors, like we can live in a place and do community everywhere else and then just come to a space just to lay our heads.
Yep.
So,
Except there's unintended consequences for that.
yeah.
Yep, for sure.
Are we dismissed?
You're dismissed, absolutely. Yeah.